Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Tony Rivenbark is the executive director for the Thalian Hall Center for the Performing Arts in the city. It was in 1979 that he began managing operations at that highest profile building, and along with being the community's resident expert on the rich history of Thalian Hall, Tony Rivenbark may be the most well-respected actor in the entire community. He has directed, produced, and acted in more than 200 productions. Now, many people know that Tony Rivenbark's career on stage began as a college student in 1966. But we found out during our interview that his entertaining career began at a much younger age. You are really a history buff, aren't you?
Yeah. I've always, that was my whole, always history. History was my first love was history. Uh-huh. And then theater kind of came out of the fact that, that's one of the few places that you can be in history. Mm-hmm. Is in plays.
Now, do you like any kind of history? Do you like specific genres, specific eras?
No. I'm fascinated by history of natural history is probably not so interesting to me, but particularly anything having to do with architecture and society in the theater and the arts. All of that kind of mixed in together.
And is that why Thalian Hall is such a love of yours, the architecture and the history?
Yes, I'm sure that's it. That's been a big part of it, a big part of it, and it happened the first time I ever walked in the building.
Yeah, and that was amazing because I remember. I want to get to that in a second.
Sure.
Now, what kind of child was Tony Rivenbark up there in Duplin County?
Well, actually, he was doing theater. He was interested in history and theater, and that was the years of the before the centennial of the Civil War, so there was a lot of stuff. But my children, my parents took me to outdoor dramas, so that was theater and that was history. So it was all sort of mixed in together. And I used to do, and television had just come out. So I was born in '48,
right.
So we had one of the first televisions on the block, And so in the early '50s, you were watching things like I Married Joan and then I Love Lucy, and both of them, particularly Lucy, was always trying to get into show business. So there was all these jokes, where she would put on a play or whatever. But my favorite was I Married Joan, and she did a place where she was doing a Civil War play, and she and the costumes and the sets arrived to one woman's club where they were going to do the show, and the cast arrived to the other. She sent them to the wrong place, so she had to do all of the parts in the play, so she would keep going around, coming out
doing
in a different costume, playing the same different characters. So I could do that. So I made up my own plays and would put a quilt on a clothesline, and then make the neighborhood kids come and watch, and then I would make up these plays.
Wow!
And go in and out playing all the characters. It was inspired by I Married Joan.
Right. So you were a performer even before that first trip to Thalian Hall.
My first television performance was at 5, doing Ball in the Jack on whatever the station was in Greenville.
Really?
Yeah. I don't remember what channel, but what was the
WNCT? It might have been at that time.
WNCT.
Yeah.
Yes, because I lived in Warsaw.
Right.
So I took dance. So I appeared on television when I was 4 or 5. So I've been doing this a long time. Were
you? I take it then you were just enamored with wanting to be in front of people and performing.
I don't know. I think it was just the whole. It was the playing of it. It was my kind of play. Right. It was my imagination thing. There was no theater in Duplin County to speak of. There was not drama classes. You didn't do a play. Very seldom.
Right.
Was there. So I just was interested in the creation of a production.
What did your parents do?
My father was a Pontiac dealer, and my mother was a housewife who loved to shop.
Oh, really?
So we went shopping. So I grew up in what were the really big cities: Goldsboro, Raleigh,
right.
Wilmington.
Right.
So she felt that shopping was an education. So she didn't have any problem at all taking us out of school and driving, and we would spend the day in the stores, and if there was something historic to see, we would see it. you know.
And you came to Wilmington College at the time,
and
you wanted to do 2 years here and then go to Chapel Hill, right?
That was the plan, yeah, because you know, whatever, the age of 18, and I wasn't saying I was a brilliant student. I mean, I wasn't stupid, but I just didn't apply myself. I was more interested in other things. So when it came time to apply, the plan was to go to Chapel Hill and go to law school and come back and be with the family business.
Mm-hmm.
And so when, you know, you always need a backup plan. So I said, you know, I don't know if I can get into Chapel Hill. So I said, well, what other town has a school? So I picked Wilmington because I liked the town of Wilmington. So I picked that school, Wilmington College, thinking, and then when I was accepted at both, I thought, you know, I might be better off in a little place than a big place. I might get swallowed up. So I came to Wilmington. And then met Claude Howell and Doug Swink, and then just all. And bye-bye law career.
Yeah, and then your talent for dancing actually got you your first role.
Right.
Doing the Charleston.
Doing the Charleston, yeah. When in Duplin County, it was a man came through, an itinerant dance instructor. And actually, essentially, if you look at it historically, this has been going on in this country since the 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
Some guy sort of arrives in town who teaches dance, and he gathers people, and once they've taught, then he moves to another town. So this man came in, and he started teaching in Clinton, which was about 14 miles away. And we had family in both. We were back and forth to Clinton.
Right.
So I started taking dance from him, and it was ballroom. And that was when I was little. I had taken tap and all that, which every little kid takes, at least in those days, in the 50s. But this ballroom guy, and so he started teaching. So my mother took me over to take it from him. Then he came over to Warsaw and started teaching. But I was already like a year ahead.
No.
And so my father actually opened a little nightclub in Warsaw, with a stereo.
Right.
And people gathered, you know, the crowd that were taking ballroom dancing and danced. There was a little dance club in Warsaw.
Wow.
And I was always there, and quite often I was a very popular partner because I was ahead of all the men in the class. I could do the steps better. So I would be dancing with these people that were like 3 times taller and wider than I was.
You were the veteran as a teenager.
Right, so I was the little dance kid. So that's all how it came of that. So when I went to accidentally signed up to an audition card and wrote "I Do a Mean Charleston," and Doug asked me would I do it. So I got up and did it. Yeah. And it was a 20s musical, which is why I wrote that.
Right.
And that was it.
And the career was born.
Well, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
Now after graduation, you went to New York for a while. What did you do there?
I finished after I finished Wilmington. I graduated from UNCW because it had changed by then, and I still didn't quite know what I wanted to do with it. So I went to Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And but I had gotten involved with Beth Grant, who did a show here and who lived here. And she did a production called Holy Ghost in East Carolina, written by Romulus Linney, Laura Linney's father, who came from a very prominent political family in western North Carolina. And so I went to see her in that show, and then she decided she wanted to produce it off Broadway. And so she enlisted me, and we started going around and raising money for it.
Right.
And doing this. She had a list of names of people that she thought would support it. And so I got involved with producing that show off Broadway with Beth Grant, most recently seen in Jackie as Lady Bird Johnson.
Yeah.
And I was watching last night because I was watching her in Speed. She gets blown up in Speed.
Yeah.
But so that's how that got involved, and then ended up staying up there for a while.
And so how long were you there before you came back to Wilmington? And what brought you back?
Well, I would come back every summer and do summer stock theater with Doug Swink. I did 11 seasons of summer stock at UNCW. And I was there when it first started. And so I would come back every summer. And then after a certain point, I decided that maybe... And then I came back to do the Liberty Cart in Kenansville.
Okay.
And then the next year, I was hired as the director of the Liberty Cart. The first year was somewhat of a disaster. And so for 2 years I directed the show. And so then I decided not to go back to New York, but to head to Florida. And is a major regional theater center, a lot of theater in Florida. Randy Delago was from Wilmington. He used to do theater. He was head of a play theater there. Peter Smith was another actor. So I knew people down there. So that was what I had planned to do when the job at Thalian Hall became available.
Right. Now, what doesn't the public know about theater and people who do theater? Because I think the public thinks, well, you just go and you do something and then you go somewhere else. But you really have to almost sink your life into this for a small period of time and then wait for the next project to come, don't you?
Well, I think there's a lot of things. I made a comment the other night after a meeting. We were talking about stuff and there were some problems we were trying to resolve. And I said, the hardest thing about theater is not acting. The hardest thing is putting it all together. And I think most people just don't know how much goes in to making a production happen. But there's a whole process even before that, which has to do with trying to choose material and arranging for the royalties and the casting of that and assembling a crew, support crew, lighting designer, costume designer, set designer, trying to get all that stuff in place and people's schedules. And in a community like this, which has so much going on, so much activity, it's phenomenal, really. Almost the best people are in great demand. And so you've got to work out schedules. So all of that stuff has to happen even before the first rehearsal. And then there's that whole process of doing that. And the theater is a collaborative art, but it works best when it's a dictatorship. Because it's
one
not
person
something
from
like
the way down.
Somebody has to have the overall vision and try to pull it together. And sometimes what irritates me as an audience member is when I see productions that are inconsistent. Great cast, but the costumes don't work, or great production altogether, but the sets. One set looks great, and one set looks like it was painted maybe tomorrow. Those things.
Right.
So that consistent, and that's not easy to do. And that takes an overall vision and collaboration. And all directors are not equal, and some directors have a much better sense of the total project, and some people are far more oriented to the acting and the play and the words and the script. And are allowing other people to determine the other, and it kind of comes together at the end somehow. But Lou Criscola used to say, the whole goal was to try to get everything to come to the river at the same time so you could cross.
Right.
And so the whole creation of theater is a building up and tearing down process.
Okay.
So when everybody's, you got the lines and the blocking and they're all doing that, but then you start adding in the other elements, and all the work that you have begins to fall apart because that has an impact on that move. All of a sudden you have the door, and the door is over here, but you also have to have this thing in your hand, and there's a sound cue that you have to listen to. Then the focus and concentration to the actor goes to making those physical things work. So all of a sudden the lines go out.
Right.
So all these pieces have to eventually come together, and then that's hopefully what the audience. And then you add the element of the audience.
Right.
Particularly if it's a kind of show that requires a response from the audience, i.e. comedy or musical theater. Not so much with tragedy, though audiences still, there are feelings in that. And even in tragedy or serious drama, there's quite often comic parts. So the audience is another layer to that.
Are there good audiences and bad audiences?
Every audience is different. Every show is different. That's what's so exciting about doing theater.
Really?
I said one time that we think of film as being very realistic and theater's being fake. But it's really the opposite.
I was going to say,
because film is an illusion masquerading as reality. Theater is reality masquerading as illusion, and it's trying to make you feel like you're seeing something different than what you're actually feeling. But it's actually happening.
You can't get any more live in theater, right?
Right, and film is all very realistic because a part of it is you can throw anything away that doesn't fit.
Right.
It
Or
can
do
lay
it
on
until
the,
you
on
get
the
it
floor,
right.
or you do it till you get it
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
and you piece it together, and you're really doing very realistic looking stuff.
What do you enjoy more? Now, you've gone back and forth hundreds of plays and director and actor. What do you enjoy more? Do you have to take one hat off and put another hat on? Or can you be a good actor even if somebody else is directing?
I think it is a problem being a producer
Okay.
at an actor, because the producer has the responsibility of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The director has the responsibility of the show in particular, the cast, the production itself, but the total project is under the producer. The actor is primarily concerned with what they are doing individually and then how it relates to other people.
Right.
But when you're both actor and producer, even worse, star, and quite often that might be the case, then you have to be careful about which hat you're wearing, because you can speak to everyone and actually what you say is important, because you're actually the buck stops, but it can't be coming from the actor. The actor is equal with the other actors. The producer is above the actor. So then that puts you in a somewhat awkward position.
How has it been for you? Have you had good times and bad times doing both?
Well, yes, but particularly of reason because I've been doing the Cube Theater, which was created because when we reopened the Stein, it's such a small footprint that it was a different kind of space, and people didn't know quite how to make productions happen. So I started doing a series productions, and each one would have a specific problem. Let's say, okay, how do we do XYZ show? How do we do the show with a big cast?
Okay.
How do we do a show that has a musical component? How do we do a show that has more than one change? So we have a problem, and then we figure out how to solve that in that space so that people would understand that that space could be used for a lot more than you just look at this little tiny space of 14 by 30 feet with no wing space, no backstage.
Right.
So,
when did you go? Do you remember the first play that you directed?
First play I directed?
Yes.
In life, in history?
Yeah, and in theater after you'd been doing summer stuff.
When I came and started working with Doug Swink, and Doug was a great mentor, and he really liked me a lot. I think he saw me as in some ways a version of him, and I see actors too. I see them as a version. They aren't the same at all, but somehow or other, they just the way they work and the way they act, the kind of energy they have, whatever it is. You see a kind of a father-son, an older, younger version of yourselves. So Doug saw that in me,
Right.
and so one thing he saw, that I was very organized when I was doing productions, that I had a process, that I developed a process, and every actor has one. They're not always the same, but he asked me to direct a piece for Family Services, a little tiny play, a little one act that was done, and he asked me if I would direct that. So it was my first thing. I had no idea what I was doing, and it just continued to grow from that.
And the first time that you went into something and were almost fearful of what the result might be?
Well, there's always that. It's the whole business of darkest just before the dawn, or whatever that word is. That building up, tearing down process as the show gets ready to go into the final days of production to get ready for preview and then opening, dress rehearsal, etc. That's quite often where people feel the lowest, because there's so many components being added, and you quite often with companies, unless things are going exceptionally well, and that happens,
Right.
but you find that people, how's the show going? Oh, it's going fine. They don't say, "Oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be fantastic," because they don't have that confidence yet. So that's that's the worst part. But when I was doing on Golden Pond, which was the first show that we did, that was a realistic
Right. Yeah.
play, a serious play.
You played Norman in that one, right?
Norman in the studio,
Right.
Which is a very complicated set, and they have the pond. The Golden Pond is important. I mean, you have to create some essence of it. When we did that, we came up with a way to make it happen. Gary Ralph Smith is a wonderful set designer, and we had a good cast, and so on and so forth. But there were some problems, and at one point, as an actor, I lost it with the rest of the company, but it wasn't the actor losing it, it was the producer. But I was in the rehearsal, and that is awkward because that's not how it works.
Right.
The actors you gripe up. And so the actors that go to the director or the stage manager, and the stage manager relates that, or you go and talk privately to the director and say, this is not working for me, or so-and-so is stepping on my lines, or I'm being upstaged and I don't like it.
Right.
You don't bring it up in the middle of the scene. That's, not like something of the feud with Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. That's just not the way you do things.
So how did you
not proper?
How did you come across and make a pond in that small little? What did you use for the pond itself?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is all in the words,
right?
But we just had a back wall, and so we did Gary Ralph created this pastiche, almost abstract, of pieces of cardboard that gave the feeling of trees and woods that receded back, and then layers of blue and silver that gives you that feeling of a lake and a reflection. So it was really an abstract work, but it's enough to say that. And then with the sound at the scene of the opening scene and the loons and the birds,
right,
and then looking out the window with the thing and talking about the pond becomes real. That's the great thing about live theater is the imagination of the public. And if you say it right and you create that feeling, people see what it is you're seeing even though it's not there.
Your mind, I mean, most of the public, when they think about On Golden Pond, they think about Henry Fonda as Norman.
Yes.
So as an actor taking on that same role in the theater, what is your mindset? Do you have to make them forget Fonda? Do you have to make Norman Tony Rivenbark? Give me your thoughts about how you approach that.
Well, I mean, I think you go back to the work. The actors, Claude Howell one time told me, he was talking about the fact that you have creative artists, the creative artist, and the interpretive artist.
Okay.
The creative artist is the painter, the playwright, the composer. The interpretive artist is the actor, the musician. It's not meaning that they aren't creative. It's just their part of the process is based upon what someone has put down on paper.
Okay.
And then they bring that to life. And then he said he had decided that there was another artist in there. It was a sort of the enabling artist, the person who is the one who runs the art gallery or the one who manages the theater. He began to see it a little differently from our conversations of what I had to do.
Okay.
That's a creative part of this process too. So going back to that, it goes back to the work. So yes, I didn't watch the movie again. It wouldn't bother me to watch it again, but I didn't watch the movie again. It should go back to the work and what are the words. That tells you how to play the part.
Right. So you don't worry about what the audience might think comparing your work to that one?
And some people, and people had different thing. I loved Henry Fonda in that part. You were as good as he. You were better than he. Quite often because it's live, it actually has more power. I'm
just curious because I mean that to some people might be a little daunting, even though it's a different type of art.
I think anytime you're playing a role that with a super person with great whatever play that you're stepping in somebody's footsteps, but it's really you're doing the work.
Okay.
I'm not playing Henry Fonda. I'm playing Norman.
Gotcha.
And then and Ethel is not Katharine Hepburn. It was Sue Ellen Yates. And Sue Ellen Yates and I have a great friendship and a great relationship. Have done played opposite each other for many, many years, 30, 40 years. That's the kind of relationship that Norman and Ethel had.
Right.
So it's not hard for us to develop that kind of closeness. So
Scrooge.
Well, there.
I think if people know Tony Rivenbark, I think that's one of the two roles that most people would know Tony Rivenbark from.
Maybe.
Did you fall in love with that role? You've done it so often.
Yes, I have. I've done 3 or 4 versions, but the one that I've done the most is the one that was written by Rob Zappel out in California when he had a theater company. He and a guy named Faison, who had North Carolina antecedents as well. But they wrote this show years ago and set it in America in the Depression, which was nice because it took that sort of old English Christmas card thing out of it and set it in the Depression. And in some ways that's much, and then that works very well for American audiences and American actors because they have to put on fake accents. So setting it in the 30s made it real. So playing the role, there is no play of A Christmas Carol. There are hundreds. Dickens wrote a little short story.
Right.
That is what all of them are based on.
And then they've expanded and done different versions.
And they go in
right?
different directions.
Right.
There's a play called Mr. Scrooge, which I directed some years ago, and I went back and looked at it again as the possibility of producing it. And I realized almost none of the words in it were actually Dickens. The thing about the Theatre Exchange production of A Christmas Carol is that it is very true to the original book, and even scenes that are not usually in a lot of them, the one that takes place on the sea, for instance. Mm-hmm. And also he added music from the folk music, basically from America, to it.
Setting it in America makes sense. Right.
So all of that works beautifully. And then everybody being on stage, Scrooge never leaves, etc. So once again, it's doing Dickens' words. It's back to the script. It's back to the words. And within the words is all the stuff about who the character is. And being a play within a play gives you also certain advantages. Mm-hmm. But it was fun playing, a bitter actor who was maybe not that great, who's touring around, and then he gets caught in a situation, and just like in Man of La Mancha, or particularly Man of La Mancha, he enacts what it is, and the people around him who are listening to him read the story become the characters in the story. Would
that be Tony Rivenbark's favorite character?
No, it doesn't take me long to pick it up again, so it doesn't require as much work, but I still have to go back and relearn the lines, but it's not as difficult. Learning lines is the bane of everybody's existence, and I know people say, how in the world did you learn all those lines? Well, it's just rote. I mean, it's not that it's, but it does take a lot of work, and it's not pleasant. It's not fun memorizing. But
what would be your favorite? Would Bossy the Cow be your favorite character?
Well, when the Pied Piper Theater, and I've done the Evil Uncle and Aladdin. I think we might do that next year. Bossy the Cow is fun. I only say moo, so I have to learn the lines. That's why he wrote the part. I screwed up Steve Cooper. I screwed up one of his patter songs one time, and he wrote the next play. He wrote Bossy the Cow that only says moo because I couldn't ruin his lines.
That's right.
It's just doing the Pied Piper Theater is so much fun because the audiences of the first and second grade school children. They have all the imagination required. Yeah. You tell them you're a box, you're a box. Yeah. You tell them you're a cow, you're a cow. Whether you're dressed as a cow or not, they get it. That's how they play. They understand that. So they don't need that. They have that willing suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, that would be the perfect audience, though.
It is. Yeah. And also, there's one thing you just cannot do. You cannot bore them. I mean, you have to be on and give them something all the time. Mm-hmm. So they're very draining to perform for. But yeah, Bossy is a great role, and Evil Uncle, and anything with the Pied Piper. It's just a joy to do. Yeah. And it's something we're so proud that we're able to produce that every year. Usually when people say, "What's your favorite role?" I say it's my next. Depending on whatever that may be. I mean, I'm going to do Sunshine Boys, and we're just sort of finishing the casting up with that. I'm really excited. Yeah. I'm playing it. I played this about a third time. Nice. Now I'm really the age of
what they would be, right? Yeah.
And cantankerous old theater person, who is being pulled out of retirement and is not real crazy about it, and working with an actor who he never liked. And they have to, Right. And we're doing some real tricks in that. So I'm really looking forward to that. The last thing was, of course, Monsignor in Sister Act. And that was great fun. I played several religious people. Religious people are always fun to play. Melvin P. Thorpe and Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Well, they just, they're interesting in any case. I mean, I was... Melvin B. Thorpe is fantastic in Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. The evangelical preacher, you get to pull out all the stops. The Monsignor was wonderful because he's trying to save this church, but then he ends up with this crazy nun, and it turns into a money-making machine, and he becomes like Berry Gordy, So it's that's all that's fun. So I don't know. Usually religious parts are really quite fun to play.
What role have you not played that you would really like to? Whether it be that whether for scheduling you couldn't do it and you were wanting to do it. Is there one that you really want to
go for the goal? Lear. But I'm not even sure I can memorize it. I mean, and Shakespeare's not easy to memorize.
Right.
I've done some. I mean, I've been over 200 and some roles,
right.
and so many I've repeated. So I don't have anything out there that I'm,
really itching to
desperate to play. Doing It's Only a Play last year was just a lot of fun because I had just seen it in New York the year before, and it was a Nathan Lane role, and I love doing. I feel offended with him. He's a lot better than I am, but I really enjoy his roles. And Hysterium I've done like 7 times in Forum, and that was Jack Guilford. And I always liked the roles he played. I always felt comfortable playing his stuff.
Favorite people you've worked with?
Oh my gracious!
Highlights of the highlights.
Well, I'm going to be working. This is on the QT. We haven't really officially announced this, but we're doing Give 'Em Hell Harry in October with Clifton Truman Daniel playing President Harry Truman Daniel.
Nice.
President Harry Truman. So he's playing his grandfather.
Right.
And it's very exciting. I'm going to direct it, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years.
Nice.
And so we're still in the final throes of figuring this out, but we're excited about doing that. But I did Amadeus with him, and he was Salieri, and I was Mozart, and that was a lot of fun. I did Oscar Wilde and played opposite Alex Worf. He was the Bosie character. That was a very interesting experience in a way, because there's conflict between the two. So it wasn't like it was fun to play with it, but he was really good to play against in that role. Lucas Cola, I did several shows that I did. That he was extraordinary actor. Played. We did Odd Couple twice. It was always funny because Lou was always Oscar and I was always Felix. But in reality, Lou was a very, very neat
meticulous
person, very meticulous. I mean, his lifestyle and his the way everything was placed. He was very, and I'm all over the place. Nothing's ever together. Everything's always sort of in disarray.
Right.
So we're actually in real life totally different. I'm much more like Oscar. And we even toyed with the idea of doing the show and alternating. And he would do Oscar one night, and I would do Oscar one night. But we never did that.
Yeah, because that might confuse the audience a little bit.
And the Sunshine Boys that we're getting ready to do ended up being an extraordinary experience because the final dress rehearsal was on September 11th, 2000, on 9/11.
Wow.
And of course that day, and we all know that day.
Yeah.
And debated and decided we would go through with the dress rehearsal with an invited audience. And so we were all somewhere else, and yet we were doing this play. And Sunshine Boys takes place at the Ansonia Hotel in New York, about the theater and Broadway and vaudeville. It's all about New York.
Right.
Everything is about New York.
Right. And
that really struck us. But we did it, and it went well, and the audience members came backstage. It still gives me chills when I think about it. Came back and said, thank you so much. We needed a break. We needed a release from this horror that's going on in our
So there was some
psyche.
thought about just being uncertain about whether you should go on with it?
And so Sue Ellen Yates directed it, and she came on and did a beautiful speech, and saying, this is our, this is saying that, we will not be bad. We will not be defeated. We will not stop our lives this way. We are going to continue to be who we are.
And almost a tribute to those who are not here, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that worked, and we had a great run, and it was really interesting.
You've been at Thalian Hall now 35 years,
37
I guess. 37 years now.
As the CEO.
Yeah. And you have since, and every time I've talked to you, the two times it's been renovated,
right.
You've been out front of it, and it's almost like it is yours, Because I mean, and I say that in a way that you care so much for the architecture, the history, and what it means to the community, that you've really kind of made it almost like, I mean, I don't want to say it's Tony Rivenbark's, but it is almost Tony Rivenbark's.
Well, I mean, there's a vision. This gets at just sort of the producer. I sort of produced the vision using all the pieces and all the work from everyone who has come from before.
Right.
And then trying to find a way to organize it and lay it out and make a case. You know, the greatest power in the world is the power of persuasion. And so we were able to come up with that sort of thing. When I first saw the theater in 1966 in September or so, in my first week or two as a student at Wilmington College, first time living away from home, all of that, and went to the audition because I saw a notice, not knowing anything about it, and sat in the balcony and looked, was sitting there by myself watching the audition process. I just couldn't believe what an extraordinary, beautiful building this was. And so this piqued my interest in architecture. That was part of that. And that I didn't know anything about it. That was strange to me. But I certainly had no idea, nor given any, that I would ever have any influence on it.
Right.
And it was, pink and white and gray. It was not very pretty, really. I mean, it was striking and handsome and magnificent, but it was very shabby, and very run down, almost like a secret place. And so it's interesting to me to see that. So I still can see that theater.
Right.
But when I first started working there wasn't that much going on in that building. So there were many hours, and we, of course, had the historic Wilmington tour narrated by David Brinkley. And so a few people would come in, and we show a slide presentation. They go on their merry way. I'd talk about the building, and they leave. So I had many times hours with nothing happening in the building when the show wasn't going on and no tourists coming in. And so I just read every scrap of paper I could find in files and whatever it is, and then began researching and began looking at it and looking at it. I have a phrase that I've said to other people who are involved in restoring theaters, and I'm always interested in the people in the smaller communities who have an idea and they have an old theater and they want to, they want to save it. Because I understand how that is, and they feel powerless, and they don't have a clue about how they're doing it. You have to figure it out. Now, there are other people now who have done that. I've learned, take it, but I had to figure it out. And as I've said, you have to listen to the building, and there are many ways to listen. But the building will speak to you. It speaks in many different ways. It speaks through newspaper articles and documents and letters and people talking. And just looking at it and then trying to figure out what did it look like this time. I have spent 37 years trying to figure out what did this theater look like when it opened in 1858. And I actually have a conjectural image that I have gotten it, which I think is pretty true.
Right.
Except for maybe about 6 feet, I can't figure out what was there. And it's basically from the front of the original four-stage to the actual proscenium of the stage itself. What was between that 8 or so feet? I haven't figured out. Was it boxes? There doesn't seem to be an indication. What was in that?
So you're still searching for 6 feet?
I'm still searching for that. So I'm searching for that. But I have literally spent 37 years trying to figure this out. And I have I can describe the feeling in the space. And that's working, and I have a conjectural drawing that I've been working with an architect, computer person, to generate that. But I still have not figured that out.
Actors that I've spoken to say you make it look so easy.
Well, that's the idea. I mean, that's exactly what you want. I mean, you don't want you want the audience to walk in and think it's just there for them at that moment. And so that's exactly that. Then you're succeeding. Dr. Richard Southern and I can't remember her. I can't remember the other woman's name, but she was a great costumer, and he wrote The 7 Ages of the Theater. And there was a little group of graduate students that met one time at Tommy Rizzuto's house, who was a set designer at Chapel Hill. And he made the statement that the sole purpose of all the sets and the lights and the costumes and all of that is to make that one lone actor's job easier on the stage. It all is there supported. If it stands out and the performance doesn't, then that's not a successful show. Successful show is when you almost don't notice any of the rest. It's just the total experience you walk away from. And I believe what I heard tonight. I believed the lies that were told to me. I believed this happened, or I have the experience of going through it. Mm-hmm. And so making it, if people think it looks easy, then that's great. You've succeeded.
And you've done it for children, you've done it for fellow actors, you've done it for an entire community. I think you've succeeded in many ways.
Oh, well, keep trying to do that. You know.
But you enjoy each one of the roles, though.
I think you enjoy.
I think you enjoy the Thalian. I think you enjoy being the actor. But I also think you enjoy being. Yeah.
Well, I get bored easy, so I like having. I like having things to occupy. Much better having too many things on my mind than not enough.
Yeah.
If I don't have anything ready to do, I can just sit on a sofa and watch TV. I'm perfectly happy.
You are? That to me would be that you wouldn't be
because I don't have anything to do. Because I don't have anything to occupy my mind, so I have to have things filling my eyes.
Right.
Sometimes, and I do it every few months, at least every 6 months. I'll just go and say, okay, I'm booking a flight to New York. I'm going up for 5 days. And I go up and I'll see 8 or 9 shows.
Really?
Last time I saw 3 shows in one day, because I need to fill up my eyes with something, and that gives me, energy and stuff I can use and make happen. It's the fodder to help the creative process. But if I don't have anything that I'm planning or working on, and I don't seek to necessarily do that, I think I'm really just satisfied just doing absolutely nothing.
What's fun for Tony Rivenbark?
Accomplishing something is fun. Making something happen and say, I've got an idea, and then you go through all the struggles to make that idea, and it comes about. That certainly, is great, but it is so fleeting. Those moments they don't last that long. Yeah, for a day or two. And so when things are great, then that's when I'm smiling and happy and sitting around talking to anybody and whatever, But when things aren't, then I'm not. And when I don't have anything to do, I have nothing to say. There's no
I don't know if I've ever heard Tony Rivenbark have nothing to say.
Well, it just depends on if you're asking the right question. If you're asking something that happened 50 years ago, or then I can go off on a tangent about what happened here, or how this looked, or something. Yeah. The other day, who dropped in? This is, literally was Kathleen Turner.
Yes.
And it was such an interesting experience meeting her, and she has a great passion for the theater, and that's why she came by, and because that really is her background. And she's about 62 or so, but she's a lot heavier, and the voice is so. She likes Colleen Dewhurst, seemed like a soprano. But she said something about it. She said, Stella Adler once said to me, "Don't let them ever give you a microphone." But I was telling somebody about meeting her and taking her through, and it was a great pleasure, and I was very honored. But then it made me think of that movie Peggy Sue.
Right. Yeah.
And I was telling somebody about that, and I said, there's a scene in that where Peggy Sue is taken home from school after she's gone back in time, and they're taking her home, and she comes to an intersection, and there's a department store, and people are going in and out, and that department store is identical to Belt Berries when Belt Berries was a department store, and it opened onto 2nd Street, and it had a curved corner there, right where the Cape Fear Hotel is. And so you entered from essentially 3 ways to the corner of that building. So in this movie, and it wasn't a set, so somewhere in America, I'd love to find out.
Right.
Maybe it's gone now, but anyway, the Belt Berries department store as a department store still exists, and I
Right.
just found that interesting. So, I can go off on tangents
Right.
of those little tidbits forever.
Yeah.
So
Well, all I know is that you have made a lot of people smile over your time here.
that's
and
comedy is always, in some ways, the most fun because you get instant gratification.
Right. Yeah.
Making that laugh happen.
Yeah.
And when you don't, like, well, I didn't get a laugh there, or I know there's a laugh there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through that many times.
Yeah.
How can I make that laugh happen? Is it, and eventually
Facial?
I do.
Is it body?
Well,
is it
yeah,
everything?
right.
Yeah.
Or is the time?
Yeah.
How can I do that? And so that is great fun. But then the serious stuff is also very satisfying.
Yeah.
And I find the same thing too. Watching play, going into New York.
Yeah.
In some ways, I feel like I've had a good meal when I see a really good serious play. The Price, for instance, you really feel like you got all of it.
I think many people would consider you the leading man of Wilmington theater. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of
My
your
pleasure.
thoughts with it. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Whether he is Scrooge or Bossy the Cow or any of the other roles he will take on in future years, you can count on Tony Rivenbark to continue entertaining audiences in the area and also educating an entire community on the rich history of Thalian Hall. If you know someone who would be a good interview for a future episode, send me an email. It's jevans@wect.com. You can also reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook. I'm active on both of those social media sites every day. I'm John Evans. Thanks for being with us for this episode of One on One.